The stars looked different from this far out. Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge of the horizon's edge and watched the void stretch endlessly before him. They were further from Earth than any human had ever traveled. The year was 2247, and humanity had finally cracked the secrets of faster-than-light travel. This mission was supposed to prove that humans belonged among the stars. Daniel was 42 years old, with gray starting to show in his dark hair. He had spent 20 years in space, working his way up from a shuttle pilot to commanding this beautiful ship. The Horizon's Edge was humanity's pride, built with the best technology Earth could produce. She carried 47 crew members, all volunteers who knew they might never see home again. Commander Lisa Grant walked up beside him. She was his second in command, a woman who had saved his life twice during the Mars Rebellion 5 years ago. She had sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a mind that worked faster than most computers. "We're approaching the Kepler 442 system," Lisa said. "Sensors are picking up something unusual." Daniel felt his heart speed up. "Unusual how?" "Ships, lots of them." "They're not human." The bridge went quiet. Every person stopped what they were doing and looked up. This was it, the moment humanity had dreamed about for centuries. They were not alone in the universe. "Sound general quarters," Daniel ordered. "But keep weapons powered down. We come in peace, remember?" The crew rushed to their stations. Dr. Helen Morris, their chief scientist, was practically bouncing with excitement. She had spent her entire career studying the possibility of alien life, now that life was right in front of them. "They're hailing us," the communications officer called out. His name was Kevin Zhang, a young man barely 25 years old. His hands shook as he worked his console. "Put them through," Daniel said. He straightened his uniform and took a deep breath. The view screen flickered to life. The being that appeared was unlike anything Daniel had imagined. It had a crystalline body that caught the light and threw it back in rainbow colors. Its face was almost human-shaped, but not quite right. The eyes were too large, the features too symmetrical. When it spoke, the words came through a translation program. "I am Overseer Thalen of the Velic Consortium. You are humans from the planet Earth." "Yes," Daniel replied. "I am Captain Daniel Hayes. We come in peace, representing all of humanity. This is a historic moment for our species." Thalen's crystalline face shifted in what might have been a smile. It was not friendly. Historic indeed. "But not in the way you imagine, Captain Hayes. Your species has been observed. We know what you are. We know your history of violence and war. We know you have not achieved peace even on your own world." Daniel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. This was not going how he had hoped. "Every species has growing pains," he said carefully. "We're working toward a better future. That's why we're out here. To learn, to grow, to meet others." "You are children playing with weapons you do not understand," Thalen said. His voice carried something that sounded like pity. "Your faster-than-light drives tear at the fabric of space. You pollute the void with your primitive fusion reactors. You are dangerous, Captain Hayes. Dangerous to yourselves and to others." Lisa stepped forward. "With respect, we've come a long way in a short time. Give us a chance to prove ourselves." "The Galactic Council has already made its decision," Thalen replied. "We have watched 1,000 species reach for the stars. Most destroy themselves. Some we guide carefully. A very rare few earn the right to join us as equals. Humanity is not ready. You are too violent, too aggressive, too young." "What does that mean?" Daniel asked, though he was afraid he already knew the answer. "It means your expansion stops here. The Galactic Council has voted to place humanity under protective custody. You will return to your solar system. Your faster-than-light capability will be disabled. Guards will be posted to ensure you do not leave again. In perhaps 1,000 years, when you have matured as a species, we will reconsider." The bridge erupted in angry voices. Daniel held up his hand for silence. His mind was racing. 1,000 years. They wanted to lock humanity in a cage for 1,000 years. "You can't do that," he said quietly. "We can, and we will. It is for your own good, Captain Hayes, and for the good of the galaxy. Too many young species have spread violence and chaos among the stars. We will not allow it to happen again." "And if we refuse?" Daniel asked. Thalen's crystalline features hardened. "Then you will be stopped. We do not wish to destroy you, but we will if we must. Our weapons are beyond your understanding. Our ships number in the thousands. You have one vessel alone and far from home. Be reasonable, Captain." The communication ended. The view screen went dark. Daniel looked around his bridge at the faces of his crew. He saw anger there. He saw fear. But most of all, he saw something the Valak had not expected to find. He saw the same stubborn defiance that had carried humanity through ice ages and plagues, through world wars and near-extinction events. "Captain, they're moving to surround us," Lisa reported. 20 ships taking position. Weapons are powered but not locked on yet. Daniel walked to his chair and sat down. He thought about Earth, about the billions of people who had dreamed of this moment. He thought about the scientists who had worked their entire lives to build the faster-than-light drive. He thought about every human who had ever looked up at the stars and wondered what was out there. And he thought about cages. Humans did not do well in cages. History had proven that again and again. Every empire that had tried to suppress humanity had fallen. Every wall built to contain them had eventually been torn down. It was in their nature to push boundaries, to rebel against restrictions, to keep moving forward no matter what stood in their way. "Lisa," he said quietly, "plot a course straight through their formation. Maximum speed." She turned to look at him. "Captain, they'll fire on us." "I know, we can't win this fight. I know that too." "Then why?" Daniel stood up. He thought about his words carefully because he knew they would be recorded. He knew they might be the last thing he ever said. He wanted them to matter. Because if we surrender now, we surrender forever. Because 47 people on this ship volunteered to explore the unknown, not to turn back at the first sign of trouble. Because humanity deserves the right to reach for the stars, not at someone else's pleasure, but because we have the strength and will to do it ourselves. He looked at his crew. Not one of them argued. Not one of them suggested turning back. And because someone needs to send a message to Earth, someone needs to tell them what's waiting out here. Someone needs to let them know that the galaxy tried to put us in a box and we said no. "All stations report ready," the tactical officer called out. His name was Greg Stone, a weapons specialist who had been training for combat his entire career. Now he would finally see it. "Then let's show them what humans do when someone tries to tell us where we can and cannot go," Daniel said. "Full power to engines. All shields to maximum. Transmit everything we've learned back to Earth on all frequencies." The horizon's edge leaped forward. Alarms blared as the Velik ships locked weapons. Thalen's voice came over the speakers demanding they stop. Daniel ignored him. The ship accelerated, pushing through the alien formation like a bullet. For a moment it looked like they might make it. Then the Velik opened fire. The first plasma blast took out their port shield. The second carved through the engine room. The third hit the bridge directly. In his last moment, Daniel Hayes smiled. The message had been sent. The recording had been transmitted. Earth would know what happened here. Earth would know that the galaxy had tried to stop them, and Earth would never accept that. The damage was done. The message from the horizon's edge took 3 weeks to reach Earth. It traveled across the vast emptiness of space, carrying the last words and final moments of 47 people who had died for refusing to surrender. When it arrived, the world stopped. President Margaret Cole sat in her office in the United Nations building in New York City. She was 56 years old and had led Earth's unified government for 8 years. She had dealt with climate disasters, resource wars, and the challenge of uniting a divided planet. But nothing had prepared her for this. She watched the recording 3 times. She watched Captain Daniel Hayes make his final stand. She watched the Velik destroy the horizon's edge. And she watched the crystalline face of Overseer Thalen as he delivered his ultimatum to humanity. When the recording ended, Margaret sat in silence for a long time. Her chief of staff, a man named Paul Griffin, waited patiently. He had been an admiral in the old United States Navy before the world government formed. He understood war better than most. "They want to put us in a cage," Margaret finally said. "Yes, ma'am. For 1,000 years. Yes, ma'am. And if we refuse, they'll destroy us." Paul nodded. "That's what they believe. They think we're too primitive to fight back. They think we'll accept their judgment because they're older and more advanced." Margaret stood and walked to the window. She could see the city below, millions of people going about their lives unaware that everything had just changed. In a few hours, she would have to tell them. She would have to explain that humanity was not alone in the universe and that their new neighbors wanted to lock them away. "What do you think we should do?" she asked. Paul was quiet for a moment. "I think we should remind them that humans don't respond well to ultimatums. I think we should show them that you can't threaten us into submission." I think we should build ships and weapons and make them regret coming to our home. That's war talk. Yes, ma'am. It is. Margaret turned to face him. They have technology we can barely understand. Ships that number in the thousands. Weapons that destroyed our best vessel in seconds. How do we fight that? The same way we've always fought, Paul replied. We adapt. We innovate. We find their weaknesses and exploit them. We refuse to quit until they realize that containing us costs more than letting us free. Margaret made her decision. It was not a decision any leader should have to make, but she was the president of Earth. The responsibility was hers alone. Call an emergency session of the World Council. Get me every military commander, every scientist, every engineer who knows anything about space warfare. And start converting our shipyards to military production. Yes, ma'am. And Paul? Yes? I want you to command the defense fleet. I need someone who understands that we're not fighting to win. We're fighting to survive. 3 days later, Margaret stood before the cameras and addressed the entire world. Her speech was broadcast in every language to every nation. People stopped working to watch. They gathered in streets and homes waiting to hear what their president would say. 3 weeks ago, humanity achieved one of our greatest dreams, Margaret began. We sent a ship beyond our solar system. We reached out to touch the stars, and we learned that we are not alone in the universe. She paused, letting that sink in. We also learned that those who came before us believe we are not worthy of joining them. They have judged us too young, too violent, too human. They have demanded that we stop exploring. They have drawn a line in space and told us we cannot cross it. Her voice grew harder. Captain Daniel Hayes and 46 other brave people died refusing that demand. They died because they believed in humanity's right to reach for the stars. They died because they would not accept a cage no matter how gilded. And now we face a choice. Margaret looked directly into the camera. We can accept their judgment. We can stay in our corner of space, quiet and obedient, and hope that in 1,000 years they might reconsider. Or we can honor those who died by showing the galaxy what humanity truly is. We are explorers. We are fighters. We are survivors. And we do not surrender. The response was immediate. Every nation pledged support. Resources flooded into the United Earth Defense Initiative. Factories that had built civilian ships retooled for military production. Mining operations expanded across the asteroid belt and the moons of Jupiter. And thousands of people volunteered to serve in a fleet that did not yet exist. Admiral Paul Griffin set up his headquarters on the moon. From there, he could coordinate the massive effort to build Earth's defenses. He worked 20-hour days, sleeping only when exhaustion forced him to. His staff included the best military minds from every nation. Dr. Helen Morris led the science division. She was a physicist who had helped develop the faster-than-light drive. Now she turned her brilliant mind to weapons design. She worked with engineers like Kevin Zhang, who had survived the destruction of the Horizon's Edge only because he had been on leave when the ship departed. The guilt of surviving drove him to work harder than anyone else. Commander Greg Stone, another survivor who had been injured and left behind, took charge of tactical planning. He studied every second of the recording from the Horizon's Edge, analyzing how the Velic fought, looking for any weakness he could find. They fight like aristocrats, Greg reported at their first strategy meeting. Their formations are perfect. Their timing is precise. They follow rules of engagement that are probably thousands of years old. And that's their weakness, Helen added. They have rules. They have conventions. They have a civilized way of making war. Paul leaned forward. And we're going to fight like cornered animals. Because that's what they've made us. The plan took shape over months of intense work. Humanity could not match the Velic in technology or numbers, but they could do things the Velic would never expect. They could fight dirty. Nuclear weapons, Helen said during one late-night session. The Velic use sophisticated energy shields and plasma weapons, but we've spent centuries perfecting nuclear explosions. We can build bombs that will overwhelm their shields through pure brutal force. Kinetic kill vehicles, Greg added. Rocks accelerated to relativistic speeds. Simple physics. Hard to stop. We fill space with enough of them, and their fancy ships become very expensive targets. Stealth technology, Kevin suggested. They'll be looking for energy signatures like their own ships use. We build vessels that run cold and quiet. We hit them from angles they don't expect. Paul listened to his team and felt something he had not felt in weeks. Hope. Not hope that they would win easily, but hope that they could make the Velic regret coming to Earth. The shipyards worked around the clock. The first warship, christened the Defiance, rolled out 6 months after Margaret's speech. She was ugly compared to the sleek Horizon's Edge. She was built for function, not beauty. Her hull bristled with missile tubes and railguns. Her engines were oversized, letting her accelerate faster than any civilian ship. And hidden in her belly were nuclear weapons powerful enough to crack a moon. Lisa Grant, who had been Daniel Hayes' second-in-command, volunteered to captain the Defiance. She had been on Earth during the Horizon's Edge mission, meeting with the Defense Council. The guilt of not being there when her captain died haunted her. Now she would make sure his sacrifice mattered. More ships followed. The Retribution, the Unbroken, the Last Stand. Each one carried weapons the galactic community would probably call barbaric. Each one was crewed by volunteers who knew they might not survive the coming war. The months passed. Training intensified. Strategies were refined. And all across human space, from Earth to Mars to the mining stations in the asteroid belt, people prepared for a fight they had not chosen but would not avoid. In the outer reaches of the solar system, scientists worked on projects even Paul did not fully know about. Secret weapons, last resort options, things that made even hardened military officers uncomfortable. Margaret visited the shipyards regularly. She met with the crews, shook hands with the engineers, and reminded everyone why they were doing this. Not for conquest, not for glory, but for the simple right to exist as a free species. "Do you think we can win?" she asked Paul one night, standing on the observation deck and watching ships move through the construction yards. "I think we can make them bleed," Paul replied. "I think we can hurt them badly enough that they'll reconsider whether containing us is worth the cost. And if they decide to just destroy us instead?" Paul was quiet for a long moment. "Then we'll make sure they remember humanity. We'll make sure that every species in the galaxy knows what happened here. And maybe someday someone else will refuse to accept a cage, and they'll remember us." 18 months after the destruction of the Horizon's Edge, long-range sensors detected something approaching the solar system. A fleet of 30 Valek ships moving at faster than light speeds heading directly for Earth. The call went out across all channels. This was it. The test had come. Paul stood on the bridge of the Defiance and looked at his fleet. 60 ships, most of them built in the past year. 60 ships crewed by people who had never seen real combat. 60 ships against an enemy that had ruled the stars for 10,000 years. "All ships, this is Admiral Griffin," he transmitted. "They're coming to put us in chains, to tell us where we can go and what we can do, to decide our future for us. I have only one order for you." The Valek fleet emerged from faster-than-light travel near Jupiter's orbit. 30 ships, each one a masterpiece of engineering that had taken decades to build. They moved in perfect formation, their shields glowing with barely contained energy. Overseer Thalen commanded from his flagship, confident that this show of force would bring the humans to their senses. He had not wanted to return so soon. Part of him had hoped that humanity would accept reality and submit peacefully, but the Galactic Council had insisted. The humans needed to learn their place before their defiance inspired other young species to rebellion. "Scan for human vessels," Thalen ordered. "Multiple contacts," Overseer, his tactical officer, reported. 60 ships spread throughout the inner system. Primitive designs heavily armed, and sensors are detecting something else. Thousands of small objects floating in space between here and Mars. "Mines," Thalen said with distaste. "How crude. Are they a threat?" "Unlikely, Overseer. Our shield should handle any chemical explosives easily." Thalen opened a communication channel to Earth. "This is Overseer Thalen of the Valek Consortium. 18 months ago, your ship refused our lawful directive. That act of defiance cost 47 lives. Do not compound that tragedy. Power down your weapons and accept Galactic Council protection. This is your final warning." The response came from a human identified as Admiral Paul Griffin, speaking from a ship called the Defiance. The name alone showed how little these humans understood. "Overseer Thalen, this is Admiral Griffin. You came to our home and killed our people for refusing to surrender their freedom. You threatened to imprison us for 1,000 years because you think we're too young to make our own choices. Well, here's our answer. Leave now, or we'll send you home in pieces." Thalen felt something he rarely experienced. Anger. These primitive creatures dared threaten him. They had 60 ships against his 30. But his ships were superior in every way. Their shields were stronger, their weapons more powerful, their crews trained for centuries. You cannot win this fight, Thalen replied. Submit now and some of you may survive. Come and make us, Paul said and cut the connection. Thalen gave the order. Advance. Destroy any ship that resists. The Velic fleet moved forward in formation, accelerating toward Mars. They would eliminate the human defense fleet, then establish a blockade around Earth. It would be over within hours. That was when the mines activated. What Thalen had assumed were simple chemical explosives were actually nuclear weapons. Each one positioned precisely through months of careful calculation. They detonated in a carefully timed sequence, creating overlapping zones of radiation and electromagnetic pulses that overwhelmed the Velic shields through sheer, brutal force. 3 Velic ships simply vanished in the nuclear firestorm. 2 more were disabled. Their shields collapsed and their systems fried by electromagnetic pulses. The perfect formation broke apart as ships maneuvered desperately to avoid the continuing explosions. What is this madness? Thalen shouted. They're using nuclear weapons in space warfare. That violates every convention of civilized combat. His tactical officer looked stricken. Overseer, they don't seem to care about conventions. Before Thalen could respond, the human ships attacked. They came from 3 directions at once, breaking every rule of proper formation and tactics. They fired missiles by the hundreds, simple kinetic weapons that relied on speed and numbers rather than sophisticated technology. They fired lasers and railguns and weapons that seemed designed with only one purpose: to kill as violently as possible. 2 human ships died in the first exchange, cut apart by Velic plasma lances. But they had accomplished their goal. They had forced the Velic fleet to scatter, to break formation, to react rather than act. All ships pattern Delta. Paul's voice rang out on the human command channel. Hit and run. Don't give them a stationary target. Make them chase us through our own backyard. The battle became chaos. The Velic tried to reform their lines, to fight the proper way with disciplined volleys and coordinated fire. The humans ignored all of that. They hid behind asteroids and used them as weapons, pushing them into Velic ships with careful thrusts. They rigged damaged ships with antimatter charges and set them on collision courses. They fired nuclear-tipped missiles and then detonated them at close range, accepting their own destruction to take a Velic ship with them. On the Defiance, Lisa Grant coordinated the defense from the captain's chair. She had learned warfare from Daniel Hayes, who had learned it from officers who had fought in Earth's final wars. She knew that when you were outgunned, you did not fight fair. You fought mean. Target that cruiser, she ordered. All missiles, rapid fire. Overwhelm their point defense. Dozens of missiles launched from the Defiance and 3 nearby destroyers. The Velic cruiser's defensive lasers took out most of them, but not all. 3 missiles got through. The cruiser's shields held against the first 2, but the third was special. It was tipped with a shaped nuclear charge designed by Dr. Helen Morris herself, meant to focus all of its energy into a single point. The cruiser's shield collapsed. The hull breached. Air and crew vented into space. 1 more down, Lisa said grimly. Moving to next target. The battle raged for 6 hours. It spread across millions of kilometers of space from Jupiter to Mars to the asteroid belt. Both sides took terrible losses. Human ships were faster and more maneuverable, but Velic ships could take far more punishment. Every exchange seemed to favor the Velic in raw firepower, but the humans kept coming, kept adapting, kept finding new ways to hurt their enemy. Commander Greg Stone coordinated tactical operations from Luna's military command center. He watched the battle unfold on dozens of screens, moving forces like pieces on a chessboard. But this was not a game. Every destroyed ship meant hundreds of lives lost. Send the reserve squadron to Sector 7, he ordered, and activate the gravity mines near Mars. Sir, that will affect our ships too. I know. Send them the warning. Anyone who can't get clear in 30 seconds accepts the risk. The gravity mines were another human innovation. Devices that created artificial gravity wells strong enough to pull ships off course. They were indiscriminate weapons that did not care who they caught. But they were effective. 3 Velic ships got caught in overlapping gravity fields and collided with each other at high speed. The resulting explosions were visible from Earth. On his flagship, Overseer Thalen watched his fleet diminish. He had started with 30 ships. Now only 20 remained operational. Yes, the humans had lost more, but they seemed willing to trade ships at any ratio. They fought with a desperation and viciousness that shocked him. Overseer, we should withdraw, his tactical officer suggested. Regroup and request reinforcements. Thalen wanted to refuse. To retreat from these primitives would be humiliating. But his officer was right. The humans were not fighting like a civilized species. They were fighting like animals backed into a corner, and they were far more dangerous than intelligence had suggested. All ships, fall back to Jupiter. Maintain defensive formation. The Velic fleet withdrew, pulling back from the inner system. The humans did not pursue. They could not afford to. Their fleet was in shambles. Many ships barely functional. Casualties in the thousands. Paul stood on the bridge of the Defiance and watched the Velic retreat. Around him, the crew was silent. They had survived, but the cost had been terrible. Casualty reports, he said quietly. 32 ships destroyed or disabled beyond repair, Lisa reported from her station. Another 15 badly damaged. 4,216 confirmed dead. Wounded count is still coming in. Paul closed his eyes. 4,000 people. 4,000 lives spent to drive back an enemy fleet that would certainly return with more ships, more weapons, more determination. Did we win? Someone asked. No, Paul said, opening his eyes. We survived. And we taught them a lesson. We taught them that humans are willing to fight with everything we have. That we'll use any weapon, accept any loss, violate any convention to stay free. They'll be back, Lisa said. I know. And next time they'll bring more ships. They'll be ready for our tactics. They'll adapt. So will we. Paul looked at the damage reports streaming across his screens. Then he looked at the surviving ships of his fleet, battered but still flying, crewed by people who had just proven they would not break. Send a message to President Cole, he ordered. Tell her we held. Tell her the Velic know now that threatening us has a cost, and tell her to prepare for a long war because this was just the beginning. The message went out. Across Earth and its colonies, people learned that humanity had faced an ancient, powerful enemy and survived, not through superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but through sheer determination and a willingness to fight dirty. The Galactic Council received Thalen's report with shock. A fleet of 30 Velic ships had been bloodied by primitive humans using crude nuclear weapons and unorthodox tactics. Species across the galaxy read the reports with a mixture of horror and fascination. Some admired humanity's courage. Others feared what these aggressive newcomers might do if allowed to spread. But everyone agreed on one thing. Humanity had proven they would not go quietly into any cage. The question now was what the galaxy would do about it. On Earth, Dr. Helen Morris gathered her team in a secure laboratory deep underground. 6 months after the first battle, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the ancient assembly hall on the neutral world of Sanctuary Prime. The debate was fierce and immediate. The Velic delegation demanded full military action. Overseer Thalen himself presented images of the battle, showing how humans had used nuclear weapons without hesitation, how they had violated every convention of civilized warfare, how they had proven themselves too dangerous to be allowed freedom. They must be contained, Thalen argued, his crystalline form flickering with intensity, or they must be eliminated. There is no middle ground with these creatures. They know only violence, but other species were less certain. The Drayan Collective and old and cautious people worried about the precedent. The Kasari Union questioned whether humanity's defiance might be justified. Even some Velic voices argued for patience. The vote came down to a compromise that satisfied no one but offered a path forward. The Sol system would be blockaded. No resources in. No ships out. Humanity would be given time to reconsider, to suffer the consequences of their defiance. Eventually, hunger and isolation would force them to accept Galactic Council protection. The blockade fleet began assembling. 300 ships from a dozen species, the largest military force gathered in 3,000 years. They would surround human space completely, cutting off all access to the wider galaxy. It would be a slow strangulation, meant to avoid the violence of direct combat while still enforcing the Council's will. On Earth, President Margaret Cole received the news with a heavy heart. She called her military advisors and civilian leadership together for an emergency meeting. They're not going to fight us directly, she explained. They're going to starve us out. No trade, no resources from outside the solar system, no contact with any other species. They think we'll break. How long can we hold out? Someone asked. Admiral Paul Griffin answered. We have enough resources in the asteroid belt and outer planets to survive indefinitely. But our expansion stops. Our exploration stops. We're back in a cage, just a bigger one. Margaret looked around the room at tired faces. The first battle had cost them dearly. Every person here had lost someone they knew. But she also saw something else in their eyes. The same stubborn determination that had driven humans to survive every crisis in their history. Then we show them that cages don't hold us, she said. We show them that blockades can be broken, and we make sure they understand that fighting humanity does not end until they stop, or we do. The next phase of the war began quietly. While the blockade fleet assembled, humanity prepared for total war. Every resource was rationed. Every factory converted to military production. Every person contributed to the effort, whether building ships or growing food or designing weapons. Dr. Helen Morris led a secret project in the outer Kuiper belt, far from any prying sensors. She called it Project Prometheus, and only a handful of people knew what it really was. She worked with a team of scientists who understood they were building something terrible, something that could never be used without crossing a line humanity had never crossed before. It's a nova bomb, Helen explained to Margaret during a private meeting. A device that can destabilize a star, cause it to go supernova prematurely. It would destroy everything in the system. Planets, stations, ships, everything. Margaret felt sick. Why would we build something like that? Because if they push us to extinction, we need them to know we can take systems with us. It's a deterrent, ma'am. A threat that makes them reconsider whether containing us is worth the risk. That's genocide. Yes, ma'am, it is. But so is what they're trying to do to us, just slower. We're building 3 of these devices, and we're going to let the Galactic Council know they exist. We're going to make them afraid of us. While Helen worked on her terrible weapon, Commander Lisa Grant prepared for a different mission. She had volunteered to lead Operation Longshot, a desperate plan to strike at Velic infrastructure outside the blockade. If humanity could not break the blockade directly, they would make the cost of maintaining it too high to bear. Lisa assembled a force of volunteers, 98 men and women who knew the odds. They would take 10 of humanity's newest stealth ships, vessels designed to run cold and quiet, designed to slip through enemy sensor nets. Their mission was simple on paper: get through the blockade, reach Velic territory, and cause as much damage as possible. We're not going to be soldiers, Lisa told her crew during their final briefing on Luna. We're going to be raiders, pirates, terrorists, if that's what they want to call us. We're going to burn their supply stations, wreck their shipyards, and prove that no Velic is safe as long as they maintain this blockade. One of her officers, a young woman named Kate Bishop, raised her hand. Ma'am, they're going to call us war criminals. Let them, Lisa replied. History is written by survivors. Our job is to survive and make sure humanity does too. The blockade fleet arrived and took position around the solar system. 300 ships created an impenetrable wall, sensors scanning every cubic meter of space, ready to intercept any vessel trying to leave. The Velic commander, a stern officer named Kaleth, sent one final message to Earth. This blockade will remain until humanity accepts Galactic Council authority. We do not wish you harm. We simply insist you stop your reckless expansion. Accept our guidance and this ends peacefully. Paul's response was brief. The only thing that ends peacefully is when you leave our system. Until then, we're at war. The first months of the blockade were hard. Earth's colonies on Mars and the outer planets had to become self-sufficient overnight. Food production increased. Mining operations expanded. And everyone tightened their belts, rationing resources carefully, but humanity adapted. They always had. They found ways to recycle everything, to make use of resources the Velic ships ignored. And they waited for their moment. That moment came when Lisa Grant's fleet made their move. They had spent months drifting at the edge of the Kuiper belt, their ships powered down, running on minimal life support. To any sensors, they looked like debris or dead hulls. The blockade fleet ignored them. On the chosen night, all 10 ships powered up simultaneously and accelerated to maximum speed. They aimed for a gap in the blockade coverage, a brief window where sensor coverage overlapped imperfectly. It was a 1 in 1,000 chance, but it was the only chance they had. All ships, this is Grant, Lisa transmitted. Silent running until we're clear. If we're detected, scatter and meet at rally point Omega. If we die, we die making sure Earth knows we tried. The ships raced through the dark, their stealth systems absorbing every sensor pulse, their crews holding their breath. Alarms sounded on one blockade ship, but by the time they responded, the human vessels were gone, accelerating away at speeds the enemy could not match. They had made it. 10 ships, 98 people loose in Velic territory with one mission: make them pay. The first strike came 3 months later. A Velic refueling station in the Proxima system exploded, destroyed by antimatter charges. 50 Velic personnel died. The Galactic Council was shocked. How had humans gotten through the blockade? Where would they strike next? The second attack hit a shipyard in the Sirius sector. Missiles launched from stealth ships, crippling the construction facilities. The third attack was the boldest. Lisa herself led a raid on a diplomatic station orbiting the Velic homeworld, broadcasting a message to every ship in range. This is Commander Lisa Grant of the Human Strike Force. You came to our home and tried to cage us. You thought we would accept your judgment, your authority, your blockade. You were wrong. Every station you build we can destroy. Every ship you send we can hunt. Every system you hold we can reach. End the blockade or this is your future. A future where no Velic sleeps safely, knowing that humans are out there in the dark. The galaxy recoiled in horror. Humans were conducting terrorism, striking civilian targets, violating every rule of warfare. But the Velic were learning a harsh lesson. Blockading humanity did not stop them. It just made them more desperate and more dangerous. Back in the Sol system, the blockade continued, but the crews of those 300 ships were no longer confident. They had thought this would be easy, a simple police action. Instead, they were stuck in a stalemate, unable to advance, unable to leave, knowing that somewhere out in the galaxy, human ships were hunting their people. Paul watched reports from Lisa's raids and felt a mixture of pride and shame. Pride that humanity was fighting back, shame at what they were becoming. But he pushed the shame aside. They had not started this war. They had only responded to threats against their freedom. "Sir, we're detecting movement in the blockade fleet," an officer reported. "They're reinforcing certain sectors, weakening others." "They're getting nervous," Paul observed. "They're spreading thin, trying to cover everything. Which means we might be able to exploit gaps. Do we try to break through?" Paul shook his head. "Not yet. Let Lisa's raids do their work. Let the Galactic Council see what it costs to fight us. Every month they maintain this blockade is a month we get stronger, more desperate, more willing to do whatever it takes." On Sanctuary Prime, the Galactic Council debated endlessly. Some called for an all-out assault on Earth. 3 years into the blockade, something unexpected happened. Commander Lisa Grant and what remained of her strike force did not destroy a station or raid a supply depot. Instead, they captured a living member of the Galactic Council. Senator Kovar of the Drayan Collective was touring an outer colony world when human stealth ships emerged from the darkness. They disabled his security escort with electromagnetic pulses, boarded his personal transport, and took him without firing a single lethal shot. The entire operation lasted 12 minutes. The galaxy erupted in outrage. Kidnapping a council member was unprecedented, a violation so severe that some species demanded humanity be glassed immediately. But Lisa had calculated this carefully. She knew that taking Kovar was a risk, but it was also an opportunity. The message she broadcast across 1,000 worlds was simple. Senator Kovar is alive and unharmed. We have treated him with respect and dignity, which is more than your blockade has shown us. You want to judge humanity? You want to decide if we're worthy of freedom? Then judge us fairly. See what your blockade has done to us. See what you have forced us to become. Senator Kovar will be returned safely in 30 days. But first he will see Earth. The Galactic Council demanded Kovar's immediate release. The Velic prepared a rescue fleet. But Lisa was already moving, racing back towards Sol with her prize. On Earth, President Margaret Cole prepared for the most important diplomatic meeting in human history. She was 62 now, aged beyond her years by the stress of leading humanity through total war. But her mind was still sharp and she understood what Lisa had given her. A chance to be heard. When Senator Kovar arrived on Earth under heavy guard, he was not imprisoned. He was treated as an honored guest. Margaret met him personally at the landing pad. "Senator Kovar," she said, extending her hand, "I apologize for the manner of your arrival. But we needed you to see the truth, not the reports filtered through Velic propaganda." Kovar was old. even by the long-lived Drayan standards. He had served on the council for 3 centuries, had seen 100 species rise and fall. But he had never been kidnapped before, and certainly never by a species as audacious as these humans. "This is an act of war," he said stiffly. "We've been at war for 3 years, Margaret replied. "Your blockade sees to that. But war is not what we want, Senator. We want you to understand us. We want you to see what your judgment has cost." Over the next 30 days, Kovar was shown everything. Margaret held nothing back. She showed him the bombed cities where Velik strikes during the first battle had killed civilians. She took him to the memorials where names of the dead were carved in stone. Thousands of names, including the 47 from the horizon's edge. She showed him the factories where exhausted workers built ships around the clock. She showed him the rationing stations where families received barely enough food to survive. She showed him the schools where children learned to use emergency shelters because they never knew when the blockade might turn into full invasion. "This is what your protection looks like," Margaret said, standing in a memorial garden. "These are the people you decided were too violent to be free. Look at their faces, Senator. These are farmers and teachers and engineers. These are people who just wanted to explore, to learn, to reach for something greater." Kovar remained silent, but his eyes showed something Margaret had not expected. Doubt. They took him to the military bases, showed him the weapons humanity had developed, not to threaten, but to explain. "We built nuclear weapons because your shields could stop our conventional arms," Admiral Paul Griffin explained. "We built stealth ships because your sensors were too good. We adapted and innovated because that's what humans do when threatened. Every weapon you see here exists because you forced us to build it." Dr. Helen Morris showed him something else. She took him to the Kuiper Belt facility, to the vault where the Nova bombs waited in cold storage. "This is what desperation looks like," Helen said quietly, standing before the terrible weapons. "We built these because you gave us no choice. If you push us to extinction, Senator, we will not go quietly. We will take systems with us. We will make the galaxy remember what happened when an ancient power tried to cage a young species that refused to break." For the first time, Kovar spoke. "You would commit genocide?" "We would do whatever we must to survive," Helen replied. "That is the lesson you taught us. That is what your blockade created. We were explorers. You made us warriors. We wanted peace. You gave us war, and now you reap what you have sown." But Margaret did not want to leave him with only images of weapons and war. She showed him the good parts of humanity too. She took him to concerts and art galleries. She let him meet with scientists who dreamed of studying alien stars. She introduced him to children who asked innocent questions about his crystalline skin and his long life. She showed him humanity, all of it, the violence and the beauty, the cruelty and the compassion. On the final day before his scheduled return, Margaret sat with Kovar in a quiet garden overlooking the Pacific Ocean. "We are flawed," she admitted. "We fight among ourselves. We make mistakes. We have a capacity for terrible violence. All of that is true. But we also have hope, Senator. We have the ability to dream of better things, to reach for the stars not to conquer them but to understand them." "The Velik were right about one thing," Kovar said slowly. "You are dangerous. Yes, because you made us dangerous. You came to our home and told us we were not good enough. You drew a line and dared us to cross it. And humans, Senator, do not respond well to being told what we cannot do." Kovar was quiet for a long time, watching the sun set over the ocean. Finally, he spoke. "I will recommend that the council end the blockade." Margaret felt her heart leap but kept her expression neutral. "Why?" "Because I have seen what it costs. I have seen what you have become, and I understand now that you will never stop fighting. If we maintain this blockade for 100 years, you will still be building weapons, still be planning raids, still be refusing to surrender. And every year that passes, you will become more dangerous, more capable, more willing to use those terrible weapons in your vault." He turned to look at her. "The Velik wanted to protect the galaxy from your violence, but their protection has created something far worse. A species that sees the entire galaxy as an enemy. A species that will stop at nothing to be free." "We don't want to be your enemies," Margaret said softly. "We just want to exist on our own terms." "I know. And that is what I will tell the council." Senator Kovar returned to Sanctuary Prime exactly as promised, 30 days after his capture, unharmed and unguarded. His testimony before the Galactic Council lasted 6 hours. He described everything he had seen, everything he had learned. He spoke of human suffering under the blockade and of human determination to resist it. And he spoke of the Nova bombs, of weapons built in secret that could make any system pay the price for threatening humanity. They will never submit, Kovar concluded. Not in 100 years, not in 1,000. The blockade has not weakened them. It has hardened them. It has turned explorers into warriors and scientists into weapons designers. Every day we maintain this blockade, we create a more dangerous enemy. The debate that followed was fierce. The Velic argued for escalation, for full military assault. Other species called for negotiation. The vote was close, closer than any in Council history, but it passed. The blockade would end. Humanity would be recognized as a sovereign species with the right to expand and explore, but there would be conditions. Human military forces would be monitored. Human expansion would be observed. And if humanity threatened other species, the full weight of the galactic community would respond. It was not the unconditional freedom humanity wanted, but it was freedom nonetheless. When the news reached Earth, people filled the streets in celebration. 3 years of rationing, of fear, of loss finally ended. The blockade fleet began withdrawing. 300 ships that had surrounded human space now departing one by one. Admiral Paul Griffin stood on the observation deck of the Defiance and watched them go. Lisa Grant stood beside him, returned from her mission, scarred but alive. "We won," she said. "We survived," Paul corrected, as he had so many times before. "And we proved that humans cannot be caged. They'll never trust us." Good. Trust is earned over time. But respect, we took that by force. We showed them that fighting humanity costs more than leaving us alone. Margaret Cole addressed the world one final time from the same spot where she had declared war 3 years earlier. Today, the blockade ends. Today, humanity is free to reach for the stars again. We paid a terrible price for this freedom. We lost thousands of people. We did things we are not proud of. We became harder, meaner, more willing to fight. She paused, her eyes reflecting the weight of those years. But we also proved something important. We proved that humanity will not accept chains. We proved that we would rather die free than live in a cage, and we proved that any species that tries to suppress us will regret it. Now comes the harder work. We must rebuild, we must heal, and we must show the galaxy that we can be more than warriors, that we can be explorers and scientists and diplomats, that we can earn through peace what we won through war. But she ended with a warning. To the species watching us across the galaxy, know this: